Well, I read the review, the book review, written by Luigi Mangione on the manifesto of Ted Kaczynski, which he gave 4 stars, and he appeared to admire Kaczynski's analysis of modern Western society. The manifesto is called "The Industrial Society and Its Future," and Mangione quotes a Reddit post that talks about the book or about Kaczynski, which says, among other things, peaceful protest has gotten us absolutely nowhere. It says that when all other forms of communication fail, then violence is necessary to survive. He said, you may not like his methods, but to see from his perspective that it's not terrorism, it's war and revolution. He said, peaceful protest is outright ignored. Economic protest isn't possible in the current system. So he said, how long until we recognize that violence against those who lead us to such destruction is justified as self-defense? He says, we're animals, just like everything else on this planet, except that we've forgotten the law of the jungle, and we bend over for our overlords when any other animal would recognize the threat that we're under and fight to the death for survival. Violence never solved anything is a statement uttered by cowards and predators. That's what he said. That's what Mangione quoted in his book review. Now, again, this is Mangione quoting someone else, but he's quoting it because he agrees with it, presumably. There's a lot to dissect in that. I mean, a lot of the conclusions that drive the opinions are themselves opinions. I mean, the conclusions are themselves opinions, such as the conclusion that peaceful protests have gotten us nowhere, which leads to the opinion that violence is necessary, and the conclusion or the assumption that all other forms of peaceful communication have failed. That's an opinion. That's not a fact. That's an opinion. Peaceful protest is ignored. Economic protest is not possible. Okay, these are all opinions. And I would suspect that they're actually afterthoughts being used as justifications for violence rather than violence being something that has been determined as being necessary after thorough reflection. Because look, powerlessness is very seldom an actual state that exists. It's a mindset. It's a defeated mindset. It's a defeated mentality. It's a mentality that perceives the enemy as overpowering and almost omnipotent. This is a mental state. Powerlessness and helplessness is a psychological condition, not a real world condition in most cases. Because look at Mangione himself. He's a rich kid, valedictorian, from a big influential family in his area. He's from the elite class. Of course, he isn't powerless. He isn't helpless. Kaczynski was from the same class, a mathematical prodigy, a genius, what have you, Ivy League and whatnot. These are not working class people. These are not struggling people. Violence is the resort of those who have no other resort, generally. So I wouldn't normally expect to see a rich kid from a rich family who has all sorts of resources at his disposal to resort to gunning someone down in the street as if he was someone with no resources and no options. He, by nature of his wealth, his education, his family, and so on, had options. The killer and the killed, in this case, are both men from the same class and from the same economic strata. I think that's interesting. Now, his action is being received by the working class as an act of vengeance. But the only working class player in this drama so far has been the McDonald's employee who called the cops, because a $10,000 reward promises to solve a lot of problems for anyone who's living paycheck to paycheck. So I think it's fascinating. There are theories going around that Mangione had back problems, or that his mother had chronic health issues, and that therefore this was some sort of a personal grievance by him. But again, he's rich. No one in his family is going to die because they can't afford health treatment or health care. I mean, who knows? That McDonald's employee, that McDonald's worker who snitched on him might need that $10,000 to pay for their own medical bills. But no one in Mangione's family is going to go without health care. On one hand, this incident has the potential to help redirect public attention towards more appropriate targets of opposition. I've literally been saying for decades now that the proper focus of activism and opposition and resistance and political organizing and so forth should be the corporate sector. And indeed, this action that was allegedly committed by Mangione has been largely received by the working class in America as justified, which should terrify the ruling class. And this is one of the most interesting aspects of this, I think, because I do not personally believe that peaceful protests, economic protests, and nonviolent means of communication and engagement with power are useless. And I don't believe they are ignored. In fact, I think that the idea that these types of efforts are futile is propagated precisely because power does not want people to engage in them. Because they are useful, and they can be useful, and they can be effective. They want you to feel powerless, they want you to feel helpless, and they want you to become radicalized and to commit actions that will get you in prison. In my opinion, the views that were expressed by Mangione and the Reddit post that he quoted actually reflects complete intellectual subjugation to power, because it's based on a perception that absolutely nothing can be done. A perception that the power structure is completely impervious and invulnerable and cannot be moved in any positive way whatsoever. Well, okay, you transferred power from the public sector to the private sector, and then you made the private sector immune from any sort of public accountability, from any sort of so-called democratic mechanisms. And it's precisely because your so-called democracy only applies to government and not to the private sector, that's the reason why you moved power away from the government and gave it all to business, precisely because you did not want to be democratic in the management of your society. So now you do have tyrannical power in your country. Now you do have dictatorship in your country. You are ruled by autocratic oligarchs and by corporations. And yes, you do need to do something about that. You do need to resist that. You do need to oppose that. Because look, United Healthcare, HMOs, insurance companies, and so on, all of these are among the most powerful industry lobbies and campaign contributors in the United States of America. But these companies only exist and only have the power to oppress and to harm you because you don't have socialized healthcare in the United States. And you don't have socialized healthcare in America because those companies that have co-modified public health and who profit from your sickness and profit from your death have captured your government, along with the rest of the private sector. Your government is completely owned. I don't personally see how whacking a CEO of a health insurance company is going to lead to socialized medicine in the United States. I think there are any number of more effective and more productive efforts that could be made in this regard. But that's exactly what I'm talking about. You have been indoctrinated, apparently even at the highest levels of academia, to believe that nothing can be done. That's why Mangione's class status is significant. Because as I said, in theory, his privileged position in the society puts him within the power structure. But he took the action of someone who's outside the power structure, beneath the power structure, which means that even he has been made to believe that the power structure is invincible. And he's not the only one. Wasn't it just a few months ago that we saw the sons and daughters of the elite protesting on Ivy League campuses for Gaza? The upcoming generation of the ruling class are rebelling against the power that they are on track to inherit. But they haven't figured out any ways to reform the system. That's a very serious problem for America. The fact is that people turn to violence when nonviolent methods, not that they don't work, but they require too much effort. They require too much patience and time and energy. That's the case most of the time. In a country like the United States, and in many others, what it comes down to is their money and our masses. In other words, the only equalizer in terms of power between us and the elites is collective action, organizing, solidarity, and patient, disciplined, focused persistence. And that takes a great deal of effort. But most people don't have that kind of time or energy. So someone like Mangione theoretically had resources. He had time, he had energy, and he could have pursued organizing. He could have funded organizing. He would have had the tools available to him to do that. But instead, he did what he did, allegedly. He killed a CEO who will be immediately replaced. Now, maybe his hope, again, if he's the actual culprit, he might have hoped that his action would ignite a countrywide movement, a revolution against corporate domination, maybe. But we can probably put his action in the same category as what Ted Kaczynski did and what Timothy McVeigh did. McVeigh believed that blowing up the federal building in Oklahoma would start a revolution. To one extent or another, Ted Kaczynski also thought that his bombing campaign as the Unabomber would start some sort of a movement that would collapse the system, collapse the power structure. But none of these actions inspired copycats. Now compare that with the mother of all school shootings at Columbine High School in Colorado. There have been literally thousands upon thousands of copycat crimes since then. Over 600 school shootings so far this year in the United States. So are we going to see an avalanche of CEOs getting whacked? Not very likely. Because you don't actually get to outsource the heavy lifting when it comes to grassroots popular movements, you know? You don't get to just be the guy who does some dramatic action that then inspires a mass movement to emerge fully formed because of your heroic act or your martyrdom or what have you. That's probably why you have school shooter copycats, but not copycats of so-called revolutionary violence generally. Because ultimately, both are just acts of extreme rage, despair, hopelessness, frustration, and an inability to address grievances with any sort of wisdom or maturity or patience. Well, none of this can inspire a movement. This is a very American, very Western approach to problem solving, Violence. Eat the rich. When that CEO got killed, the next scene in the movie is supposed to be all the peasants marching out, with their torches and their pitchforks to storm the penthouses and the gated communities, set up the guillotines, start eliminating all the corrupt, greedy, super rich by the dozens. That's the movie script. But it's not the real world. And you have completely disabled your own population's ability to know how to address problems in the real world, even the children of your elites. Because look, Mangione is basically from the TikTok generation, the social media generation. He's from the generation of young people who barely consume mainstream media, which means that he has grown up on a less controlled narrative, and he's been exposed to the perspectives of people outside his class strata and perspectives about his class strata, meaning people subject to the power structure that he's a part of. So he's exposed to the experiences and the views and the attitudes and the opinions of the people that he's never supposed to be exposed to, while also growing up within the power structure. Okay, that's an infiltration. That amounts to an infiltration because you can no longer control the narratives that the children of the elite consume. You can no longer ensure that they will have been successfully educated and indoctrinated to carry on with the preservation of your system. This is a very serious problem for you. And then you see, from that quote that Mangione used in his review of the Kaczynski book, you can see how much more serious your problem really is. Your obscene Darwinian narrative about humanity, that we're all just animals, fundamentally and naturally guided by the law of the jungle. You have predation and victimization and violence embedded in your whole so-called civilization. It's carved into your cultural DNA the same way Mangione carved into the shell casings the words defend, deny, and depose. And you've created a power structure, a system of control that is undemocratic, that is authoritarian, and that is supposed to be self-reinforcing. But the campus Gaza protests and the CEO killing makes it look very much like you can't count on it being self-reinforcing anymore because the next generation is estranged. So you have an oppressive system in your country that has made everyone believe that it cannot be held accountable, that it cannot be changed, that it cannot be modified, that is completely contemptuous of the population and completely rejects any externally demanded discipline or ethical reform. A system that has very deliberately made people feel powerless to change it. Even the people within the system, within the power structure, even they have been made to feel that the power structure is unchangeable and that it's impossible to hold it to account. And you have all that in a society where you believe that human beings are adversarial beasts in a zero-sum contest for survival and dominance. Well, how do you think that's going to play out? See, you did what you did with your society because you have this mentality, this predator-prey mentality. You don't have democratic instincts. You don't believe for a second that the people are supposed to hold power accountable. You only ever said that because you know that you come from a so-called civilization that abuses power as a function of power. So you have a deep paranoia and a suspicion about those in power because you know how you are. You know that you can never resist abusing power because fundamentally you do believe in the law of the jungle. So you came up with this democratic theory, this artificial model of public accountability for the government, and then you almost immediately shifted real power away from the government and you transferred it to the undemocratic private sector because, again, you can't help yourselves. Once any of you have any power, you reject accountability. So yes, you moved power into the private sector and declared that business must be untouchable. Business should be free to operate however it likes. And the so-called invisible hand of the market can wrap its grip around the throat of government. Well, you created this dynamic in your society, this law of the jungle, dog eat dog, winner take all. You created this dynamic in your society. You know, the one at the top of the hill won't let anybody else up. So you have it designed so that the only way for anyone to ever be at the top of the hill is to knock the other guy down. You understand me? Because you have insisted on the unaccountability of power in your so-called democratic society, you have literally barred any civilized approach to the redress of grievances. You have told your society that power will never bend. So the only thing that is to be done is to break it. That's the lesson that you taught your society. Like I said, I don't believe that peaceful protest or economic protest or nonviolent methods are necessarily ineffective or useless. But you have actually deliberately convinced people of that as part and parcel of trying to make sure that the power structure can be unaccountable, because you know very well that you have to deny the effectiveness of what is effective. You never want people to think that they have a viable option of resistance and change, because the fact is almost every single successful social movement in America that has actually improved the lives of people has been achieved through nonviolent methods, through patient long-term strategies. And you can't stand for that to happen. So no, you don't want people to believe that what works, works. Because you have an uncivilized, predatory mentality, because your power structure is tyrannical, you need everyone to feel overpowered, and you need everyone to feel helpless. But when you have such an adversarial relationship with your own people, and at the same time have implanted in them a Darwinian concept of human animals into their heads, eventually, with no other options being regarded as plausible, you make violence inevitable. It's not inevitable because it has to be. It's not inevitable because there really are no other options in reality, but because you have insisted to make people believe that there are no other options. And you've done that because you would rather turn your society into a bloody conflict zone than accept changing or accept power being held accountable. You would rather there be violent confrontation between power and the people because you feel certain that you would win that confrontation, or else you feel certain that the people will back down when they're faced with the violent power at your disposal. Because again, you're just like that. You're adversarial, predatory, animalistic, and you think that any time power is challenged in any way, or even if power is asked to behave with a modicum of human decency, then it constitutes a threat that has to be crushed. Oh, it's a bloodthirsty system. You know, that so-called healthcare system of yours is the most bloodthirsty of them all. Literally the most inhumane, anti-human, psychopathic, systematic death machine that you could possibly imagine. It's a system that's supposed to be about saving lives, but deliberately, knowingly, cold-heartedly lets people die. That's the American healthcare system. And as long as the lower classes are the only ones who are outraged about this reality, well, that's fine, because they can't do anything. But now you have your own elite class outraged about it to the point of violence. This is a total system meltdown in America. I told you that there were going to be all sorts of terrorist attacks in the West, in America, in Europe, and so on. All sorts of violence, because your societies are breaking down. There's going to be political violence, there's going to be racial violence, there's going to be class violence, and there's obviously going to be random criminal violence. Because you can't create conditions of desperation in your society and not expect people to do desperate things. Luigi Mangione is from that demographic group that's supposed to be invested in the system. He's from that class that's supposed to protect the system because they benefit from it. But you're losing control even of the stakeholders of your own power structure. I don't think you can even comprehend how dangerous that is for you. Because Luigi Mangione is also from that demographic and from that class in your society that was raised to feel entitled to take matters into their own hands. Furthermore, he's from the class and the demographic in your society that, as I said, is a part of the power structure, which means that he also comes from the most ruthless, the most calculating, and the most capable demographic in America for efficient and targeted violence. That's the class that he comes from. And he has the qualities of that class, the predatory class, the dominating class. And he's just one of many from that class who are turning on their own.